Senator Kennedy, you're a senile old fossil who should be drooling in a nursing home, not sitting in the U.S. Senate. The words cracked through the House Financial Services Committee hearing room like a whip, each syllable calculated to wound. Maxine Waters stood behind her microphone with the bearing of a prize fighter who'd never lost, her famous finger already jabbing the air for emphasis. At 86, she moved with the aggressive energy of someone half her age, her purple suit chosen specifically to pop on the C-SPAN cameras. Behind her, a carefully orchestrated crowd of supporters had packed the gallery. Their matching T-shirts read, "Reclaim Our Time," and they had already begun their rehearsed chant, "Retire! Retire! Retire!" "This Confederate relic," Waters continued, her voice rising above the din, this swamp creature who probably bought his Oxford degree from the same place he got that ridiculous accent, has no business questioning my—" She was live streaming, of course. The phone mounted on her desk showed 450,000 viewers and climbing. The comments scrolled past in a blur of fire emojis and "Yas Queen" affirmations. John Kennedy sat at the witness table with the stillness of a heron waiting for fish. His brown suit had seen better decades. His tie was slightly askew, and his readers perched precariously on the end of his nose as he doodled on a yellow legal pad. To any observer, he looked exactly like what Waters claimed, a relic, an anachronism, a man overwhelmed by the modern world. "Can you even hear me, Grandpa?" Waters taunted, playing to her online audience. "Or do we need to get you one of those ear trumps from your century?" Kennedy looked up slowly, a gentle smile creasing his weathered face. His eyes, behind those crooked readers, held something that might have been amusement or pity. "Oh, I hear you just fine, Miss Waters," he said, his voice soft as moss on cypress. "Question is, can you hear your constituents from your $4.5 million mansion?" The hearing room went silent. Even the chanters paused mid-retire. Waters' face tightened. "What did you say?" "But let me not get ahead of myself," Kennedy continued, returning his attention to his doodle, which appeared to be a pelican in flight. Beside his legal pad sat 6 manila folders, each thin as a whisper, arranged with the precision of a man who liked his world ordered. The folders bore simple labels in Kennedy's careful script. Banking Blues, Home Sweet Home, Family Business, Pay to Play, Caribbean Connection, and The Beginning. Kennedy selected the first folder with the deliberation of someone choosing the perfect lure for the perfect fish. "Shall we begin?" The folder opened with a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hearing room. Kennedy extracted a single sheet of paper, holding it with the reverence one might reserve for historical documents. "Ms. Waters," he began, his Louisiana drawl thickening like morning fog on the bayou, "this fossil. Maybe you're right, these old bones do creak something fierce when it rains, but help this old fossil understand something about modern banking." He adjusted his readers, squinting at the document. "See, back in 2008, when the financial world was falling apart like a cheap suit in a hurricane, there was this bank, One United, smallest bank in Massachusetts. Assets of about $400 million. Small potatoes, as we'd say back home." Waters shifted in her seat, her hand moving unconsciously toward her phone. "Now this bank was special," Kennedy continued, taking on the cadence of a grandfather telling a bedtime story. "Not because of its financial strength. Lord knows it was failing every stress test thrown at it. Not because of its importance to the financial system. It could have disappeared tomorrow and nobody outside Boston would have noticed." He looked up, his eyes meeting Waters directly. "No, this bank was special because your husband owned $350,000 worth of stock in it." The hearing room stirred. Reporters leaned forward. Republican committee members suddenly found the proceedings fascinating. "Treasury rejected this bank for TARP funds 3 times, Kennedy said, producing another document. 3 times! Said it didn't meet the criteria. Too small, too weak, too risky. But then something miraculous happened. Like water turn into wine, or in this case, rejection turn into $12 million in taxpayer money. He held up a document marked Treasury Meeting Minutes number 20847B. Want to know what changed? You did. You personally called Treasury officials. You personally arranged meetings. You personally intervened for a bank in which you had a direct financial interest through your husband. Waters grabbed her microphone. That's a lie. I was helping a minority-owned bank serve the community. Is this a lie, too? Kennedy interrupted gently, producing another paper. Email from you to Treasury. And I quote, "This bank needs special consideration. I trust you understand the importance of this matter to me personally." He let the words hang in the air like humidity before a storm. But here's where it gets interesting, Kennedy continued, pulling out a tablet. Last month, the former CEO of One United, Mr. Kevin Cohey, decided to have himself a come-to-Jesus moment, got himself an immunity deal with the FBI, started singing like a mockingbird at sunrise. The video that played on the hearing room screens showed a nervous man in a gray suit sitting in what was clearly an FBI interview room. "Ms. Waters promised us the money," Cohey said on the recording. "She said if we kept quiet about her involvement, if we played ball, the Treasury would come through. And it did. $12 million just like she promised." Waters shot to her feet. "This is doctored. This is—" "Ma'am, please don't make me play the audio of you telling Mr. Cohey, and I quote, 'You know who I am. You know what I can do. That money is mine. I mean yours." The last words echoed through the silent hearing room. Waters had gone pale beneath her makeup. Funny thing about Freudian slips, sometimes the truth just wants to come out like a catfish breaking the surface. He pulled out one final document from the first folder. "Oh, and that $75,000 that showed up in your husband's consulting account 2 weeks after One United got its bailout, the FBI traced it. Came from a One United subsidiary in the Cayman Islands. Imagine that." Republican committee members were no longer hiding their reactions. Jim Jordan was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is criminal corruption," he exclaimed. Kennedy closed the folder gently. "Now, I may be just an old fossil, Ms. Waters, but where I come from, using your public office to enrich yourself is called corruption. Using taxpayer money to save your husband's investment, that's theft. But what do I know? I'm just a senile old man who bought his degree, right?" He selected the second folder. "Speaking of buying things, let's talk about that house of yours." Kennedy opened the second folder with the care of an archaeologist uncovering ancient artifacts. From within, he produced what appeared to be a large folded map, which he spread across the witness table with deliberate slowness. "Now, Ms. Waters," he began, his voice taking on a professorial tone, "you represent California's 43rd Congressional District. Beautiful area. Inglewood, Hawthorne, parts of Los Angeles. Good, hard-working people. Average household income, about $47,000 a year." He pulled out a red marker, the kind teachers use, and began circling areas on the map. "Here's your district, and way over here," he drew a large X about 12 miles away, "is Hancock Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Median home price, about $4 million. That's where you actually live, isn't it?" Waters leaned into her microphone. "I maintain a residence in my district as required by—" "Oh, you maintain a residence?" Kennedy's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Well, let's talk about that residence." He pulled out a photograph of a modest house with barred windows and a chain-link fence. 6368 West Boulevard, your official district address, the one on your voter registration form, number CA43, 1991, 0847. He produced another photograph, this one of a sprawling mansion with manicured lawns and a security gate. "And this is 4859 Fremont Place, Hancock Park, your actual home, where you actually live, where you actually sleep every single night. This is harassment, Waters protested. I don't have to— No, ma'am, you don't have to answer me, Kennedy agreed amiably, but you might want to answer Southern California Edison. He pulled out a stack of utility bills. See, electricity bills tell stories. Your mansion in Hancock Park? Average monthly bill? $2,847. That's a lot of air conditioning. Your district residence? Average monthly bill? $45. That's what we call a maintenance charge. Nobody's using electricity because nobody's living there. The hearing room had become utterly silent, except for the scratch of reporters' pens and the soft whir of cameras. But maybe you just like to save electricity at your district home.
The footage that played showed the front of Waters' district house. A timestamp in the corner showed dates scrolling by. Days, weeks, months. The house remained empty. Newspapers piling up, grass growing wild. 350 days of footage, Kennedy noted. You appeared exactly twice, both times for less than 10 minutes, both times with news cameras. I have a right to privacy, Waters shouted, her famous finger jabbing the air. You surely do, Kennedy agreed, but you don't have a right to fraud. See, claiming to live in a district you don't actually live in, that's a violation of Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. But more than that, it's a violation of trust. He pulled out another document. This is from your neighbor in Hancock Park. Excuse me, your neighbor in the place you don't live, Mrs. Patricia Whitman. She provided an affidavit saying she sees you every morning walking your dog. Every morning for 20 years. That's a mighty long commute from your district residence. The crowd that had been chanting for Kennedy's retirement had gone silent. Some were looking at Waters with expressions of dawning realization. But here's what really bothers this old fossil, Kennedy said, his voice hardening slightly. Your district is one of the poorest in California. Your constituents struggle to pay rent, to keep the lights on, to put food on the table. And you live in a $4.5 million mansion in the richest neighborhood in the city. He displayed photos side by side, Waters' mansion and typical homes from her district. The contrast was stark. They call your district house the ghost house, Kennedy noted. Neighbors say even hurricanes visit more often than you do. At least hurricanes leave something behind, you just take. Waters' attorney was whispering urgently in his ear, but she waved him away. You don't understand the demands of— Oh, I understand plenty, Kennedy interrupted, his folksy demeanor dropping for just a moment. I understand that for 20 years you've been lying about where you live. That's not just a residency requirement, Miss Waters. That's a felony. Voter fraud, election fraud, and about a dozen other frauds I could name if I wasn't just a senile old man. A hot microphone caught Waters muttering to her aide, "Turn that damn camera off." Kennedy smiled sadly. "Too late for that, ma'am. See, in Louisiana, we have a saying, you can't put the crawfish back in the hole once you pulled up the trap." He closed the second folder and reached for the third. "Now let's talk about how your family's been doing all these years you've been serving the public." The third folder was thicker than the others, bulging with what appeared to be bank statements and financial records. Kennedy opened it with the air of a man about to perform an unpleasant but necessary task, like cleaning fish on a hot day. "Family," he began, his voice warming slightly. "Down in Louisiana, family means everything. We take care of our own. Nothing wrong with that. But there's taking care of family, and then there's—" he gestured to the papers before him— "this." He pulled out a chart, professionally prepared with logos and arrows and numbers that made several committee members whistle softly. "Let's start with your daughter, Karen Waters. Lovely woman, I'm sure. Since 2003, your campaign has paid her $750,000, $750,000. That's a mighty fine living." She straightened in her chair. "My daughter provides professional services." "Professional services," Kennedy repeated thoughtfully. "Let's examine those services." He pulled out a stack of Federal Election Commission reports. According to these filings, Karen provides slate mailer management, campaign literature distribution, and my personal favorite, voter outreach coordination. He looked up with exaggerated confusion. Now, I may be just a simple country lawyer, but I was curious what work products $750,000 buys. So my staff, bright young folks, much smarter than this old fossil, they went looking for examples of this work. Kennedy made a show of shuffling through papers, frowning, shuffling more. Funny thing, we couldn't find any evidence. No slate mailers with her name on them, no campaign literature she designed, no evidence of voter outreach she coordinated. It's almost like, he paused, letting the silence build, it's almost like she was being paid for being your daughter. The hearing room stirred. In the gallery, a young man in his 20s shifted uncomfortably. Kennedy noticed and nodded kindly in his direction. And that young man there, that's your grandson Mikhail, isn't it? Handsome fellow, USC graduate. According to these records, your campaign paid him $240,000 over 4 years while he was a full-time student. Kennedy pulled out a document. His title was Field Coordinator. Impressive job for a college student. Paid $1,500 an hour according to these timesheets. That's more than most lawyers make. Must be some special kind of field coordination. He produced an iPad and swiped to Instagram. This is from Mikhail's Instagram account, Spring Break 2023. Here he is in Cancun. Beautiful beach. Looks like fun. But according to this timesheet, he held up another document. He was working a 16-hour day doing voter outreach that same day from Cancun. That's dedication. In the gallery, Mikhail Waters had stood up, his face a mask of shock and confusion. He was looking at his grandmother with the expression of someone seeing a stranger. "Grandma," his voice carried across the hearing room, "you said it was legal. You said it was all legal." Waters reached towards him. "Mikhail, baby, sit down."
But the young man was already pushing past other spectators, heading for the exit. I can't do this." The door slammed behind him with a finality that echoed through the room. Kennedy watched this family drama with genuine sadness in his eyes. That's the real tragedy, isn't it? It's not just about the money. It's about what you teach the next generation. He returned to his documents. But let's continue the family reunion. Your son, Edward, paid $300,000 for consulting. Your other relatives, another $350,000 for various services. All in all, your family has taken $2.1 million from your campaign. $2.1 million meant for serving your constituents, serving your district. Instead, it served Sunday dinner. He pulled out another document, this one bearing official IRS letterhead. Criminal Referral Number LA 2024-789. That's not for me, Ms. Waters. That's from the Internal Revenue Service. Seems they have questions about why none of your family members paid taxes on this income. Seems they have questions about whether work was actually performed. Seems they have a lot of questions. Waters was gripping the table now, her knuckles white. This is a witch hunt." "No, ma'am," Kennedy interrupted gently. "A witch hunt implies you're innocent. This," he gestured to the mountain of evidence, "is what we call documentation. Every payment, every deposit, every false timesheet. Your campaign was a family ATM, and every relative had a PIN number." He pulled out one final item from the folder, a photograph of Waters' district. It showed closed businesses, homeless encampments, struggling families. "Your district has a 22% poverty rate," Kennedy said quietly. 1 in 5 of your constituents lives below the poverty line. They trusted you to fight for them, to use campaign funds to serve them. Instead, you use those funds to make your family millionaires. He closed the folder with deliberate finality. "In Louisiana, we have crawfish boils. Everybody contributes something, everybody gets fed. But in your family's case, your constituents contributed everything, and only the Waters family got fed. That's not public service, that's theft." Kennedy was already reaching for the 4th folder when Waters' attorney finally succeeded in pulling her back into her chair. Her live stream had crashed, the viewer count plummeting as supporters fled the digital sinking ship. "Ready for round 4?" Kennedy asked mildly, "because now we need to discuss your interesting interpretation of political endorsements." The fourth folder had the heft of a court filing, thick with depositions and sworn statements. Kennedy opened it with the solemnity of a judge reviewing evidence in a capital case. "Endorsements," he began, his voice taking on a philosophical tone. "In a democracy, endorsements should mean something. When an elected official endorses a candidate, it should be because they believe that person will serve the people well. It's a sacred trust, really." He pulled out a glossy mailer. "This is one of your famous slate mailers, Ms. Waters. Maxine Waters' official voter guide. Tells folks who you think they should vote for. Mighty influential in your district. Some say it can swing an election by 20 points." Waters had recovered some of her composure. "I have every right to endorse." "Oh, absolutely," Kennedy agreed readily. "First Amendment and all that. But here's where it gets interesting. See, candidates who want to be on your slate, they have to pay. Not a small fee for printing costs. Real money. Big money." He produced a rate card that looked like a restaurant menu. Local judge, $35,000. State Assembly, $45,000. Congress, $100,000. Cash or check, payment due before endorsement. It's like a political drive-through window. The documents he displayed next were devastating in their simplicity. Canceled checks from dozens of candidates, all made out to various Waters-controlled organizations. The amounts were staggering. "But here's where it crosses from unseemly to criminal," Kennedy continued, producing a new document. "This is a sworn deposition from Maria Gonzalez. She ran for state assembly in 2018. Good woman. Teacher for 30 years. Had all the endorsements except one, yours." He began reading from the deposition. "Ms. Waters' representative told me it would be $50,000 for the endorsement. I explained I couldn't afford that. He said, then you can't afford to win." Kennedy looked up. "Ms. Gonzalez mortgaged her house, paid the $50,000, and then, 2 weeks before the election, you endorsed her opponent. The opponent who paid $75,000. In the gallery, a middle-aged Latina woman stood up. It was Maria Gonzalez herself, tears streaming down her face. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice breaking. "My savings, my house, my dreams, everything." Waters couldn't meet her eyes. "But Maria wasn't alone," Kennedy continued remorselessly. "Here's Thomas Chen, city council candidate, paid $25,000, lost your endorsement to someone who paid $30,000. Here's Jerome Williams, judicial candidate, paid $45,000, watched you endorse his opponent for $50,000. He pulled out a tape recorder. "This is from a candidate who had the foresight to record his conversations. Would you like to hear your representative explaining your endorsement process?" The voice that filled the hearing room was matter-of-fact, almost bored. "Look, this is how it works. You want Maxine's endorsement? You pay. You don't pay, you don't play. And if someone outbids you, tough luck. No refunds." "But the best part," Kennedy said, pulling out another document, "is what happens to candidates who refuse to pay." He began reading from a transcript. "Maxine Waters calling radio station KJH. I want you to know that Robert Jackson is not a real Democrat. He's a plant, a fraud, and I will personally make sure he never wins an election in this city. Want to know Robert Jackson's crime? He refused to pay your $50,000 endorsement fee." The pattern Kennedy revealed was breathtaking in its scope. 30 years of pay-to-play, hundreds of candidates, millions of dollars. A political protection racket that would make mob bosses envious. Total amount collected through your endorsement scheme is $4.7 million. That's not politics, Ms. Waters, that's racketeering. And according to this, he held up a federal document, the FBI agrees. RICO investigation number LA 2024 CR 445. Active case, multiple witnesses cooperating. Jim Jordan couldn't contain himself any longer. This is exactly why Americans hate Washington. This is the swamp President Trump warned us about. Kennedy nodded thoughtfully. In Louisiana, we have gators that demand tribute too. Difference is, gators are honest about being predators. They don't pretend they're doing you a favor while they're eating you alive. He produced one final document from the folder, a photograph of Waters at a campaign event, surrounded by young, hopeful candidates. "Every one of these young people paid you," Kennedy said sadly. "They believed in democracy, believed their ideas mattered. You taught them that only money matters. That's not just corruption of office, that's corruption of democracy itself." He closed the folder and reached for the fifth one. His expression had darkened, as if the next revelation pained him personally. "Now we need to talk about Haiti, and I warn you, Ms. Waters, this one's going to hurt, because stealing from candidates is bad enough, but stealing from earthquake victims, that's a special kind of evil." The fifth folder was wrapped with a black band, as if in mourning. Kennedy opened it with genuine reluctance, his weathered hands careful with documents that seemed to carry the weight of human suffering. "January 12, 2010, he began, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Magnitude 7.0 earthquake, 300,000 dead, 1.5 million homeless. Biblical devastation." He pulled out photographs that made several people in the hearing room gasp. The destruction was total. Buildings pancaked, bodies in the streets, children wandering through rubble, calling for parents who would never answer. "The world responded," Kennedy continued. "Billions in aid promised. Americans opened their hearts and their wallets. And you, Ms. Waters, you positioned yourself as a champion of Haiti relief. The Congressional Black Caucus put you in charge of ensuring aid reached the people who needed it most." He produced a glossy brochure, the Maxine Waters Haiti Relief Fund. Beautiful name, inspiring mission statement, celebrity endorsements. You raised $50 million in 6 months, $50 million for Haiti's suffering people. Waters shifted in her seat, but said nothing. Her attorney's hand on her arm was the only thing keeping her seated. "Now, I'm just a simple country lawyer," Kennedy said, "but I know how to follow money. So let's follow that $50 million. He pulled out a flowchart that looked like a maze. First, it goes to your relief fund here in Los Angeles, then to a company called Caribbean Relief LLC in the Bahamas, then to another company called Island Recovery Partners in the Turks and Caicos. Then it gets interesting. He produced bank statements with certain numbers highlighted. See these wire transfers? January through March 2010, $50 million goes in, but only $40 million comes out the other side. $10 million just evaporated, like morning dew in the Caribbean sun. That money went to administrative costs, Waters began. Administrative costs, Kennedy repeated thoughtfully. Let's examine those costs. He pulled out invoices and receipts. Private jet flights to Haiti, 5-star hotels in Port-au-Prince, which is impressive since most of them were destroyed.
15 years later, Kennedy said, his voice heavy with emotion. 15 years and not one home built, not one hospital, not one school. The money just disappeared. A woman in the gallery stood up slowly. She was Haitian, her accent thick with emotion as she spoke. "My name is Marie-Claire Dominique. I lost 3 children in the earthquake, 3 babies. Your fund promised us houses, promised us hope. We got nothing, nothing but more tears." She held up a faded photograph of 3 smiling children. "You stole from the dead, Miss Waters. You stole from my babies." Waters couldn't look at her. Her hands shook as she gripped the table. "But where did the money go?" Kennedy asked, returning to his documents. "Well, some of it we've traced. A shell company in the Caymans bought a yacht. Another shell company invested in real estate in Palm Beach. Yet another made donations to various political campaigns, including yours, Miss Waters, laundering disaster relief through offshore accounts and back into your political machine." He pulled out a document marked with Haitian government seals. "The new Haitian government has been investigating. They've traced $10 million in earthquake funds to accounts controlled by your associates. They want it back, Miss Waters. They want to finally build those homes." "But here's the part that turns my stomach," Kennedy said, his folksy demeanor completely gone now.
You didn't just steal the money, you used those people suffering for photo ops. Every trip to Haiti, every staged visit to tent cities, every crocodile tear, all to raise more money you'd never deliver. He displayed a final set of photographs. Waters in Haiti posing with earthquake victims, smiling for cameras while standing in the ruins of their lives. In Louisiana, we've had our share of disasters. Hurricanes, floods, oil spills, and always, carpetbaggers show up to profit from misery. But profiting from an earthquake that killed 300,000 people, taking money meant for orphans and widows, that's not just theft, Miss Waters, that's evil. The hearing room was silent, except for Marie-Claire Dominique's quiet sobs. Even Waters' most ardent supporters in the gallery had turned away, unable to reconcile the champion they thought they knew with the evidence before them. Kennedy closed the folder slowly, as if sealing a tomb. $10 million stolen from Haiti's earthquake victims. And that's just what we can trace. The real number is probably higher, but numbers don't capture the real crime here. Hope stolen, trust betrayed, children who died in tents while you bought yachts with their relief money. He reached for the final folder, thin and old, its edges yellowed with age. One more story to tell, he said, his voice weary now, because to understand how someone could steal from earthquake victims, we need to go back to the beginning, back to who Maxine Waters really is, back to the original sin. The final folder looked different from the others, older, its manila surface aged to the color of old parchment. Kennedy opened it with the care of a historian handling primary sources, revealing documents that looked like they'd been photocopied from court archives. The 1970s, Kennedy began, his voice taking on the quality of a man telling a ghost story. South Central Los Angeles, a community struggling with poverty, discrimination, redlining. Working families trying to hold on to the American dream with both hands. And into this community came a young woman named Maxine Waters. But she didn't come as a savior, she came as a landlord. He pulled out a property deed, the old-fashioned kind with raised seals and formal script. 1973, Maxine Waters, through various partnerships and shell companies, begins acquiring properties in South Central. Apartment buildings mostly. Rent-controlled units where families had lived for generations. But Maxine Waters had plans for these properties. He continued, producing court documents, eviction notices, hundreds of them, from 1974 through 1978. Look at the reasons. Property improvement necessary. Building renovation required. Structural updates mandated. All legal language for one thing. Get the poor folks out so we can raise the rent. He pulled out a specific case file. Dorothy Jackson lived at 4827 Vermont for 23 years, raised 6 children in that apartment, never missed a rent payment, not once. An elderly woman in the gallery rose slowly, supporting herself with a walker. She was in her late 70s, dignity radiating from every line in her face. "That's me," Dorothy Jackson said, her voice strong despite her age. "I was there." Kennedy nodded respectfully. "Tell us what happened, Miss Jackson." "She came with papers," Dorothy recalled, her eyes fixed on Waters. "Legal papers. Said we had 30 days to leave. My youngest was still in high school. I begged her, explained we had nowhere to go. She looked me right in the eye and said, 'That's not my problem.'" Dorothy pulled out a yellow document from her purse. "I kept the eviction notice. 49 years I've kept it. See that signature? Maxine Waters, the same woman who later asked for my vote." The hearing room had become a theater of revelation, each document Kennedy produced adding another act to the tragedy. But eviction was just the first step, Kennedy continued. Once the buildings were empty, the renovations began. Except they weren't renovations for the community, they were conversions. Luxury apartments, market-rate units, gentrification before we even had a word for it. He displayed financial records. Average rent before evictions, $150 a month. Average rent after evictions, $800 a month. Same buildings, same neighborhood, different tenants. Tenants who could afford 5 times the rent.
And the families? Kennedy asked rhetorically. Scattered to the winds. Some ended up on Skid Row, some left the city entirely. Communities that had existed for decades, destroyed for profit. He pulled out more documents. Total properties acquired and gentrified, 17 buildings. Total families displaced, approximately 400. Total profit for Maxine Waters and her partners, $3.2 million. $3.2 million earned by destroying the very community she would later claim to represent. But here's the cruelest irony, Kennedy said, producing campaign materials from 1990. When Maxine Waters ran for Congress, guess what her platform was? Fighting gentrification, protecting vulnerable tenants, standing up for the displaced. He looked directly at Waters. You ran on the pain you caused. You built a political career on the communities you destroyed. More people in the gallery were standing now, elderly black residents who remembered, who had lived through it. Their faces told stories of recognition and long-buried anger finally given voice. I was 8 years old. You evicted my family Christmas week 1975. We spent Christmas in a shelter because of you. My grandmother died 6 months after you threw us out, died of a broken heart, leaving the only home she'd ever known. Waters sat frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. As her origin story unraveled before the world, Kennedy pulled out one final document. This is from your first campaign for Congress, your biography, Maxine Waters, born in poverty, raised in struggle, fighting for the forgotten. Every word a lie. You weren't born in poverty, you were born middle class. You weren't raised in struggle, you created struggle for others. And you never fought for the forgotten, you made them forgotten. He closed the folder with finality. In Louisiana, we have a saying, the gator that gets you is usually the one that's been watching you the longest. You've been watching your community for 50 years, Miss Waters, not to protect them, to prey on them. First as a slumlord, then as a politician. Different methods, same predator. The weight of 5 decades of deception settled over the hearing room like a shroud. Maxine Waters' empire hadn't been built on service, but on suffering. Not on representation, but on exploitation. 400 families displaced, millions stolen from campaigns, 10 million stolen from Haiti, a lifetime of lies about where you live, who you are, what you've done. Kennedy's voice was heavy with it all. That's not a political career, Miss Waters. That's a criminal conspiracy spanning half a century. The hearing room doors burst open with the coordinated precision of a military operation. FBI agents flooded into the room, their movements swift and professional, spreading throughout the room like water finding its level. The lead agent, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, approached the witness table with papers in hand. Maxine Waters, she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos, I have warrants for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, RICO conspiracy, and embezzlement of federal funds. Waters shot to her feet, her famous finger jabbing the air one final time. You can't do this. I have congressional immunity. This is a setup. This is justice, Kennedy interrupted quietly, still seated at his table, still doodling on his legal pad. 50 years late, but justice nonetheless. The crowd that had come to support Waters had transformed. The chants of retire had become lock her up. Former supporters pulled off their Reclaim Our Time t-shirts in disgust. Her live stream, which had started with 450,000 viewers, showed zero. Even her most die-hard followers had abandoned the sinking ship. As the FBI agents moved toward her, Waters made one last desperate play. This old